Okay, so you're probably checking out Richard D's resume, right? Maybe on LinkedIn, right? Senior staff, software developer, Qualcomm, pretty impressive. But in this deep dive, we're going a little deeper, beyond just those bullet points. We really want to explore his philosophy, like how he approaches software development and the principles that kind of guide him. And full disclosure, this whole deep dive is powered by Google's Notebook LM. So that's cool. This really shows off what he can do with prompt engineering.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a super interesting way to do this. It's almost like you get to peek inside, his head, like see how he thinks about, things like leadership or solving problems or how to build really awesome software.
Right, exactly. So let's start with his current role, right?
Mm.
He's a senior staff software developer over at Qualcomm. And one thing that just jumps out at me right away is that he managed to save IT infrastructure teams something like 6,000 hours every single month
Wow.
through software that he developed by working really closely with them.
That's a huge impact. And it
Right.
really speaks to something we see popping up again and again in his work and in the stuff that inspires him, this whole idea of reducing toil.
Yeah, and he actually talks about this directly in his About section on LinkedIn.
Mm.
He's very clear that any software he builds, the outcome should always be to reduce the toil of the people he's building it for.
Exactly. And toil in this context, we're talking about all those repetitive manual tasks that can really like drag teams down,
Yeah.
kill their productivity. So you can picture a skilled developer like Richard D coming in, seeing those pain points, and then boom, creating a solution, something elegant that just automates all that stuff away. And suddenly people are free to do the strategic stuff, the high value work.
Yeah, totally. And something else he highlights is this idea of community,
Yeah.
you know, like building community and helping out his colleagues. He actually says in the About section how important it is to him that his work helps the people around him. He really sees the value in building a community across different teams to lead to better success instead of working in silos.
Yeah, and this emphasis on community and shared ownership, it actually lines up really well with some of the work of Martin Fowler, one of the people Richard D lists as
Okay.
an influence. Fowler's video explaining Agile.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Well, he talks about this difference between adaptive planning versus predictive planning.
I'm guessing adaptive planning sounds a lot more uh, flexible.
Right. So think about traditional predictive planning as like you build this super detailed plan up front and then you try to stick to it no matter what happens. Agile, though, it flips that on its head. You still have a plan at a high level, but you break the work down into smaller pieces and then you adjust constantly based on feedback and new information that comes up. So it needs a really high level of trust and collaboration within the team. Individuals really have to own the process, be empowered.
Hmm. That really reminds me of something Richard D said about code. He's big on writing code that humans can understand. Readable code is really important to him.
Absolutely. And when you think about his experience leading distributed teams, it makes it even more important. You see, readable code, it's not just about getting it to work. It's about making sure that other people can easily understand it,
Hmm.
so they can modify it and build on it.
Right, and that focus on readable code, it's a key point that Kent Beck, another one of his influences, really hits on. In his talk, Kent Beck talks beyond agile programming.
Yeah, I love that talk. Beck talks about how perfection is not something we achieve, but something we are constantly doing. And that really connects with how Richard D works at Qualcomm, right? I mean, he's
Yeah.
the one who brought in code reviews and those CI/CD pipelines. And both of those things, they promote collaboration and they really help to ensure that the code is well structured and easy to understand.
So it's not just talk, right? He's putting these principles into action.
Hmm.
And speaking of putting things into practice, I mean, his resume mentions how he brought in those agile software development practices based on extreme programming back when he was at Defense Web Technologies. And then later on at Faulkner Media Group, he introduced AWS cloud technologies, version control, and CI/CD practices there too.
And at Qualcomm, he's implemented code reviews, CI/CD pipelines, and issue tracking using Jira. And what's really fascinating to me is that he seems to be constantly pushing for better ways of working, no matter what company he's at or what specific technology he's using.
Totally. He even says, you are not the code you write. Be open to critiques of your code, which honestly reminds me of Seth Godin's ideas about leadership. Godin makes this point that good leaders, they take responsibility. And they're not afraid to admit when they're wrong.
It's about having the humility to realize that you don't have all the answers, right? And being open to learning from other people, even if it means you have to admit you made a mistake. That whole idea of failing forward, seeing those setbacks as chances to learn and grow, it's really a key theme in Richard Dee's approach.
So when you see how he's adopted agile methodologies and his track record of bringing in new tools and practices, it really shows that failing forward mindset, right?
Yeah, he's not afraid to experiment,
Yeah.
to try new things, and to course correct based on the results. And that's gold in a field like software development that moves so fast and is always changing.
There's another quote I wanted to touch on. He says, as a software developer, sometimes you disagree with an implementation detail or feature request. At those times, it's okay to care less, but don't be careless. He's basically encouraging developers to speak their minds right, but to do it thoughtfully, professionally.
It's such a nuanced perspective, right? It's about striking that balance between being assertive and being collaborative. You want to be able to advocate for your ideas, but you also have to respect what other people think. And ultimately, you got to be open to finding a solution that works best for the whole team. It's kind of like, Simon Sinek makes this point in Leaders Eat Last. It's about how dangerous it is when leadership is all based on fear and intimidation.
Yeah, Sinek argues that real leaders, they create a safe space, right? An environment of trust where people feel comfortable speaking up, sharing their ideas, all that.
Exactly. When leaders rely on fear or shame or anger to, try and motivate people, what happens? They create this culture of silence. Everyone's afraid to take risks, to try anything new, or to even challenge the way things are done. And that just kills creativity and progress.
And Richard D., it seems like he really gets that. He's pushing for this culture of healthy debate, where disagreements are a chance to learn and grow, not something to avoid.
It all goes back to that idea he talks about in his About section. Developing leaders, not followers. It's not just about building software, right? It's about building the team, about cultivating leadership, and giving individuals the power to take ownership and do their best work.
It's interesting, though, this developing leaders thing. It's not just how he manages teams, right? It seems like it's built into how he approaches software design itself.
That's a great point. Remember his emphasis on writing code that's human readable. It's not just about making life easier for his colleagues. It's almost like he sees the code itself as having leadership qualities.
Okay, now that's intriguing. How can code be a leader?
Think about it. Well-written code, it can actually guide and instruct other developers, right? It can communicate clearly what it does, why it's there. It can set an example of good practices, and it can even inspire other people to write better, more elegant code.
So it's like the code itself is a mentor, showing the way.
Exactly. And this whole idea of leadership through code, it links up perfectly with the work of Kathy Sierra, another one of Richard Dee's influences.
Kathy Sierra. Wasn't she the one who wrote Creating Passionate Users?
Yeah, that's her. And she's also known for her work on making badass developers.
Oh, right. I've heard of that. It's all about empowering developers to become masters of their craft, right?
Exactly. And one of Sierra's big points is that great developers, they don't just have the technical skills. They have a deep understanding of the users they're building for. They get the problems they're trying to solve, the value they're trying to deliver.
Which lines up perfectly with Richard Dee's belief that software should be about reducing toil and making users' lives better.
Exactly. It's not just about writing clever code. It's about building things that actually make a difference for people. And this brings up another interesting thing about Richard Dee's leadership style. He's willing to challenge assumptions, push back against the status quo.
Yeah, we saw that in his quote about care less, but don't be careless. Right. But are there other places we see it?
Just look at his career path. He's got this pattern of bringing new tools and methodologies into every role he takes on. At Defense Web Technologies, he introduced agile software development practices based on extreme programming. At Faulkner Media Group, he brought in AWS cloud technologies, version control, and CI/CD practices.
Right. And then at Qualcomm, he's implemented code reviews, CI/CD pipelines, and issue tracking through Jira. He's not afraid to shake things up a bit, to challenge the way things have always been done, and to advocate for approaches that he thinks will get better results.
He's not just playing by the old rulebook. He's actively trying to find ways to make the process better, to make things more efficient, more collaborative, and more user-centered.
And this is where his interest in Seth Godin's work on leadership versus management gets really interesting. Godin's argument is that managers, they maintain the status quo while leaders challenge it.
Yeah, and what's interesting about Godin's view is it's not about hierarchy. He says anyone can be a leader, regardless of their title. It's all about taking initiative, inspiring others, and making positive change happen.
So Richard D., he's embodying that kind of leadership, even as a software developer.
Exactly. His actions speak louder than any title. He's always stepping up, finding areas that need improvement, and leading the charge to make those changes.
We've talked a lot about his leadership and his software development philosophy, but what can we specifically learn from the people he's chosen as influences? What does that tell us about his values and priorities?
That's a great question. When you look at the thinkers he's picked, like Martin Fowler, Kent Beck, Kathy Sierra, Seth Godin, and Simon Sinek, it really paints a picture of what he values in software development and leadership.
Agile methodologies, human-centered design, empowering teams, the importance of feedback, continuous learning.
And don't forget the focus on building strong, cohesive teams and creating that culture of trust and collaboration. These are all recurring themes in the work of the people he admires.
It's worth pointing out, too, the variety of his influences. He's pulling wisdom from experts in software development, management, marketing, even psychology.
Right, and that says a lot about how he learns and solves problems. He's not limiting himself to one field or perspective. He's actively looking for insights from all over the place. He recognizes that they all have something to contribute to his understanding of software development and leadership.
So it's safe to say Richard D.'s a lifelong learner, always looking for new knowledge and applying it to his work.
Absolutely, and that's a quality any employer would love to see. It shows adaptability and a growth mindset, which are essential for success in the tech world, which is always changing so fast.
We'll dive deeper into what all this means for potential employers in part 3. Until then, hold on to those resumes. All right, so we've really dug into Richard D.'s influences, and we've gotten this great look at his leadership style and how committed he is to building software that puts people first. But I guess the big question is, what does all this mean for someone like you? Someone who might be thinking about hiring him.
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, right? When we connect all these dots, we see a developer who's not just like technically amazing, but someone who really thinks deeply about what he does and how it affects people.
Right, he's not just coding in a bubble. He's thinking about the bigger picture, about the users, the team, the goals of the whole organization.
Exactly. And that's so valuable for any company. I mean, imagine Richard D. on your team. You're not just getting someone who can write code, you're getting someone who understands how important it is to build software that actually solves real problems for real people, not just checking boxes.
And he's all about creating that collaborative, supportive environment where everyone feels like they can contribute, do their best work.
For sure. And don't forget about his focus on continuous learning and adapting, embracing new technologies, new ways of doing things to really push innovation and make things more efficient.
It sounds like he'd be a perfect fit for a company that's really into those agile principles, and that human-centered approach to software development.
Absolutely. But it goes beyond just the methodology. Remember how much emphasis he puts on reducing toil, on automating all those tedious tasks that can really bog a team down? Well, that translates directly into more productivity, more efficiency for your company.
Right. And his focus on building community, on fostering collaboration, well, that could help break down those silos that a lot of companies struggle with, and really improve communication between different teams.
Yeah, he's not like a lone wolf coder, right? He gets the power of teamwork, the importance of bringing people together to reach a shared goal.
And let's not forget that he's willing to challenge the status quo, to stand up and advocate for better ways of doing things.
Right. He's not afraid to speak up, to suggest new ideas, to push the whole team to be better. Now, that might not be the right fit for every company culture. Some organizations might prefer developers who just, follow orders.
But for a company that values innovation, that's open to trying new things, well, Richard D.'s approach could be a real game changer.
Exactly. And this takes us right back to Kent Beck and his idea that perfection is not something we achieve, but something we are constantly doing. So if Richard D.'s whole approach to software development is all about continuous learning and improvement, well, just think about what that could mean for his potential for growth, for what he could contribute to your company.
We hope this deep dive has given you some real insights into how Richard D. thinks about software development, about leadership, all that. And, as you're going through his resume, as you're thinking about him for your team, keep these points in mind.
And remember, this whole deep dive, it was created using Google's Notebook LM, and it really showcases Richard Dee's prompt engineering skills. It's this unique window into how his mind works, how he tackles challenges.
That's it for us. Until next time, keep diving deep.